You are listening to David Pawson podcasts. This is a series of 10 talks addressing Revelation's riddle. Part 4. How is it interpreted?
What I'm going to do each afternoon I'm with you, the first half of the afternoon, I'm going to take you through the next section of the book of Revelation. But in the second half, each afternoon, I'm going to go much deeper and look at some of the controversial issues. Because if you read different books on the book of Revelation, you could finish up in confusion. There are so many different schools of interpretation. And so in the second half, each day, I want to take one aspect of controversy where Christians disagree with one another and look at it carefully. Now, in chapter 4, verse 1, as we've seen, there is a change of perspective from the present to the future. Chapters 1 to 3 are only concerned with the state of the present churches in Asia on earth, but we suddenly have the change from earth to heaven, come up here, and from the present to the future, and I will show you what must take place after this. Now, the book of Revelation is full of predictions. Altogether, there are 56 separate predictions about the future. Out of 404 verses, 256 contain a prediction, or 63%. In other words, 2/3 of the book of Revelation is about the future and predicting future events. But the question comes, how future? Or how far into the future? When do these predictions happen? Have they happened already? Are they happening right now? Or have they not happened yet to us? Now, certainly the predictions are future to the time of the first readers of this book. Clearly, the book was written about 96 AD, so those churches at the end of the first century are being told about the future. But our question is, are these predictions future to us as well? Or have they already happened? Or are they even now happening before our very eyes? And that is where there are different schools of interpretation of the rest of Revelation from chapter 4 onwards. There are 4 different ways of interpreting the book. And you can go to any Christian bookstore and pick up commentaries or books about the book of Revelation, and they will drop into one of these 4 categories of interpretation. And you can't interpret it all these ways. So we've got to ask which one is right or how we handle this. Now, they have 4 labels, which you may or may not have heard of, but I'll run through them and explain them. The 4 schools of interpreting this book are called the preterist school, the historicist school, the futurist school, and the idealist school. And they each give you a different answer to the question, when are the predictions of Revelation taking place? When will they be fulfilled? The preterist says that all the predictions in the book of Revelation were fulfilled at the end of the first century AD, or during the first few centuries AD, and that they are all descriptions of the fall. Now, are you writing it all down again, or just one by one? That the predictions were all fulfilled in the Roman Empire and the fall of the Roman Empire. And therefore they take Babylon, the city that falls in the book of Revelation, as the city of Rome. And certainly Rome was called Babylon by some Christians. The first letter of Peter finishes, "Those who are in Babylon salute you." And yet it was quite clearly written in Rome. Furthermore, it says Babylon is a city sitting on 7 hills. And it's obvious that Rome sits on 7 hills. And so this school says Babylon is Rome, and in fact all these predictions were fulfilled immediately following the 1st century AD. Therefore, the things predicted are nearly all past to us. You follow me in that? Babylon did fall, the Roman Empire fell, and the predictions in the middle chapters of Revelation are concerned with the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And therefore, as far as we're concerned, we're reading history in this book. Now, have I made that clear? I'll try and take it very steadily so you can get it. The historicist takes the line that between chapter 4 and chapter 18, we have in fact the whole history of the last 2,000 years. That Revelation unfolds for us the entire church age between the first and the second coming of Christ. And that you can trace the past 2,000 years of history in these chapters and find out where you are today. And find out exactly where we are. In other words, that the whole book of Revelation covers the whole of history between the first and second coming of Christ, and each chapter takes us through the next few centuries, right up to the second coming. Here's a little book that I picked up. Studies in the Revelation, the Historicist Viewpoint. And just opening it at random, you know the first seal, the 7 seals, for example. It says seal number 1 covers the period 96 to 180 AD. Seal number 2, 183 to 212. Seal 3, 212 to 235, and so on. And that's come a bit nearer up to date, where we get to the 7 bowls. Let's try and find out where he thinks we are. The first bowl of wrath covers 1792 to 1794, namely the French Revolution. Second bowl, 1796 to 1801. Third bowl, 1796 to 1801 as well. Fourth bowl, 1805 to 1807. Fifth bowl, 1808 to 1815. Sixth bowl, 1820 to 1917. We get nearly where we are. We are in the middle of the 6th bowl of wrath. Now that's what's called the historicist point of view. I'll be looking at each of these in a moment, but it says that Revelation wasn't fulfilled in the 1st centuries AD, but through all the centuries AD. Now, having said that, there are 2 versions of it, and this gets a little complicated. The linear version of the historicist position says the whole thing just covers in one line from AD 100 to the second coming. But the cyclic version of it says that it keeps going back to the beginning and starting again, and that each series of 7 covers the whole period, so that in fact the book keeps going round in a cycle and starting again and covering the same period, so that there are in fact a number of series of visions covering the whole period. So the linear says there's just one account of the whole of the church age, but the cyclic says there are a number, and it keeps going back to the beginning, coming back to the present, going back to the beginning, coming back to the present. I don't know if any of you know the book by William Hendrickson called More Than Conquerors. That's the most popular selling book on the book of Revelation at the moment. And he takes the cyclical historicist position, so that in fact, he says the book keeps recapitulating and keeps going back to the beginning, starting again. So you have a number of reviews of church history from different angles. You got it? The linear says there's only one review of church history. I'll just add now that the historicist I find totally unconvincing. But you'll come across books that say this. The futurist takes the line that the middle chapters of Revelation are still future to us and haven't happened yet. That's what the word futurist means. That in fact, those middle chapters describe the end of the age, the final few years of big trouble when history is at its worst, what's known as the Great Tribulation, that in fact all the predictions are squeezed into a comparatively few years right at the end of church history and just before Jesus gets back. That's the futurist interpretation. The idealist says that these predictions don't relate to time at all. They are simply an allegorical or mythological presentation of the struggle between good and evil that goes on all the time. And they are simply stories or pictures to help us to interpret any time at all. That the struggle between the devil and God, between good and evil, goes on in every age, in every century, every year, and that these visions help us to interpret and understand what's happening at any time. And you mustn't expect a particular fulfillment at one time, but that this is a kind of picture of what's going on all the time. That's very much Greek thinking. The word idealist is a Greek word. It comes from Plato. The word ideal comes from that. And really it's saying, just as people say there was never such a person as Adam and Eve, that was a story to give us a picture to understand our present situation. In other words, it's saying it's myth. But it's myth with the truth in it. Do you follow me? It's like Aesop's fables, it's stories. In other words, it treats the whole thing as a parable. That it's a fictional story, but that it gives you truths by which you can understand what's going on. Now those are the four, or if you count these as two, the five positions. And every single book on Revelation you pick up, you'll find probably will fit into one or other of these views. Now, of course, it makes a great deal of difference to how we handle the book. Are these predictions in the book past to us, present to us? Are we in the middle of them? Or still yet to come? Or are they not going to happen specifically at all, but are just there to help us to understand the struggle between good and evil that we all find ourselves in? Now, should we pause there for questions to see if I've made the different views clear enough? I'm going to go on to ask what are the grounds for each view and how do we cope with them? Because I'm afraid it depends very much what church you go to or what your minister believes or what the preacher you've heard believes as to how you approach the book of Revelation. The first 3 chapters are straightforward, but actually, no, I'll say that in a moment. Are there any questions? Have you understood these different approaches? I'm going to tell you that. But I just want you to understand clearly the different approaches so that you can recognize them. If you borrowed a book on Revelation and you read it, you'd recognize straight away where the person was coming from. Shall I move on then? And you can ask... I can say they are well known. I don't know all of them personally. I'm talking about books that you buy. So I don't know them personally, but well-known Christian preachers who would be widely respected take different views. All right? Well, then let's look in more detail at these and evaluate them. And I'll try and say what's good about each view and what's not so good about each view, all right? And that's following the pattern of our Lord in the seven churches to the seven in Asia. So I'll say what's good about each view and what's wrong about each view, all right? Let's take the preterist. What is good about that view is this. It recognizes that this book was written for the 1st century AD, and therefore must have been meaningful to the people then. That it was written to help them then. So all of it must be shown to be relevant to the 1st century AD. And our first interpretation of the book must be, what did the original readers understand? Because it was for them before it was for us. Now that's what's good about the preterist. What is not so good is this, that if all of Revelation is passed to us, then it's not of much value to us except by way of historical example. See, it would simply be looking back and learning from the past, as you look back and learn from the past in the Book of Kings, for example. In other words, it wouldn't help us to face the future, but it would be of historical interest and therefore an example to us of how they faced it. But the biggest thing that's wrong with this is that most of the predictions were not fulfilled in the fall of Rome. The things that Revelation says will happen did not in fact happen to Rome, and in fact have not clearly happened yet. So that to say it was all fulfilled in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire is simply not true. It doesn't fit. And above all, if it's purely preterist, why should it be included in the New Testament if it was all fulfilled so long ago? Why should it round off our New Testament as it does? Right, that's the preterist. Now the historicist. What's good about that is that it does claim to have a message for every different age of church history. It does at least say there's something in this book that's relevant for you, which is a good point. The bad point is that no two people can agree on the dates of each bit, and that it's almost impossible to line up church history with the predictions of the book of Revelation. I read out to you, the fifth bowl is 1820 to 1917, but when you look at the details, it is a very forced correlation, and I find it totally unconvincing. Every different historicist comes up with a different pattern, lining up this with that, and there's no discernible consistency in this. It leaves you very unconvinced and very unsatisfied, this kind of book. And you say, come off it. You are really forcing it to fit into church history. The futurist, what is good about this is that the predictions do seem to lead directly to the second coming and the end of the age. And all the predictions do seem to relate to the second coming rather than the first coming of Jesus, and to lead directly up to it. And since he has not come back yet, then it makes sense that these predictions haven't come true yet. And the other thing that's good about the futurists is that most predictions haven't been fulfilled yet. So that to take the line that they are still yet to happen in the future makes a lot of sense. Against the futurist view is that means that most of the book of Revelation was not relevant to the church for the last 2,000 years. And that it was talking about things that were of no direct interest to the church all through the last 2,000 years. Would God have given us a book that would only be of any interest or relevance right at the end of history. Seems unlikely, doesn't it? The other thing is that the futurist interpretation invariably leads to an excessive interest in speculation, in calculation, in working out charts and schedules and maps. Have you seen all these? Working out exactly the order of events at the end of history, and leads to a curiosity about the future rather than an application to Christian living. And I'm afraid many Christians who get fanatical about Revelation get into this kind of clairvoyant approach, a kind of horoscope reading of the book of Revelation that is purely satisfying intellectual curiosity. The idealist, the good thing about the idealist is that it does have a message that's relevant to all Christians, in all places, at all times, and that it provides a key to interpreting the struggle between good and evil. But what's bad about this idealist approach is that if you turn it all into myth, into non-historical stories, then we lose any understanding of how the world will end. It simply becomes a fable or a picture of what's going on all the time ad infinitum. And we lose any understanding of the last days. It becomes an interpretation of all days instead of an account of the last days. Above all, it's essentially the Greek thinking that God is outside time, and that time doesn't matter to God, and that therefore history is not heading towards a goal or a conclusion. It's just going to go on and on as a struggle between good and evil. Basically, the idealist view kills the second coming as an historical event, and it tends to say Jesus is always coming to us in the struggle. Now, let me ask the brother over here something. Can you tell which I am yet? I've given you good points and bad points for each of them. So which is it going to be? Well, I'll keep you guessing a bit longer, because I want you to be thinking hard. Because if you're going to study Revelation, you've got to tackle this kind of question. Well, I want to say 4 things, and then I'm going to tell you. But let me make 4 observations. What do we conclude from this evaluation of the 4 schools of interpretation? 4 things. Number 1, it is obvious that no one key unlocks it all. And if you force the book of Revelation into one of these interpretations, you will damage it at some point. So no one of these unlocks the whole book. The second thing, I think each school has seen some value and some truth, but not all of it. Second thing is, there's no harm in using more than one. Texts can have different meanings and applications. But the important thing is to ask which approach in a particular passage opens up the meaning intended by the divine author and the human writer and the human reader. In other words, we need to be flexible in our interpretation. Thirdly, the emphasis may change in different parts of the book. We may use one of these keys for one part of the book and another for another. The main questions, of course, are about the middle part of the book. That's where there is most disagreement. Fourthly, parts parts of each school of interpretation may be helpful. But as a whole, none of them is. Because there are some elements in these four schools that are frankly incompatible with each other. Now, all of those four statements mean that we've got to be flexible with each section of the book. And now I'll tell you what I am. I'm different things in different parts of the book. There are three main sections of the book, as I've told you, and I use a different interpretation which is appropriate for that section. And these little ticks show you which ones I use. The little dashes show me which ones I don't, show you which ones I don't use. The questions show you the ones that I question, all right? Now, does that look terribly complicated? But let's just show you what I mean. Chapters 1 to 3, which we've looked at in the first half this afternoon. Do those chapters apply to the first centuries AD? The answer is yes. So the preterist is at least one right interpretation of those chapters, all right? Now, the historicist would say that those 7 churches represent 7 phases in church history. That Ephesus represents the first few centuries, and that Sardis represents the next few centuries. See, they split them up over the church age, and usually come to the conclusion that we are living in the Laodicean age, and that the whole church today is like Laodicea. Well, now, does that grab you? That's the historicist interpretation of the first few chapters. I am not convinced, because I don't think the whole church is Laodicean today. I think maybe a lot in Europe are, but the ones I know in Africa and Asia are not. So I can't see it, that you split church history up and each of these churches represents part of the history of the whole church. That's the historicist approach. So I question that. The futurist approach to the 7 churches of Asia says that before Jesus comes, at the end of history, there'll be a church in Ephesus and a church in Sardis and a church in Pergamum again, and a church in Laodicea again. That these are 7 churches that will reappear at the end of 2,000 years, and that when Jesus comes back, each of those towns will have a church again. That's the futurist. That grab you? Doesn't grab me at all. I just don't believe it. But the idealist says that these churches, between them, give you a picture of the church in any age, in any place. See? Now, in fact, without you knowing it, when I took you through chapters 1 to 3, I was using that one and that one. Do you follow me? And these two seem quite inappropriate. Now, you're beginning to understand the flexibility that we need. Most commentaries, you see, take one of these interpretations and fit everything into it. And that, to me, is a mistake. When we come to the middle section, that's the bad bit, where things get much worse. Which of the interpretations is appropriate? I don't think the preterist is, because in fact those things did not happen when the Roman Empire fell. So I rule that one out. And I don't look for a fulfillment in the past, because things did just not happen. The historicist, which I read to you, treating those middle chapters as a complete picture, unfolding of the whole of church history, I just cannot see it. It's so forced. and no two scholars can agree on what represents what. And it just seems to me it's trying to make it say something it doesn't say. But the futurist I really can see. In other words, I do believe that most of the predictions in that middle part will happen at the end of history before the second coming, in the time of great tribulation. And basically, I treat it as futurist, that middle section. But I also use the idealist for this reason. John says in his letter, the Antichrist, we know the Antichrist will come, but there are already many Antichrists in the world. We know that the false prophet will come, but there are already false prophets. We know that big trouble will come worldwide, but there are already big troubles in China and local areas in Sudan and Angola. In other words, the Great Tribulation is foreshadowed all the way through church history on a local scale. Are you with me in this? That therefore, these troubles, though they will only actually happen at the end of history, already their shadows are cast before them, and things like it we can already see happening. In other words, I don't believe Saddam Hussein is the Antichrist, but I believe he's an Antichrist. I didn't believe Hitler was the Antichrist, but he was an Antichrist. In other words, we can see events like the end happening already. And therefore, I can apply these middle predictions to any time in church history. Now, are you with me in that? I'm not saying that prediction is this that's happening now. I'm saying this that's happening now is a little foreshadowing of that. And it's going to be like that, only worse. Do you follow? And I believe Antichrist will be worse than any of the people I've mentioned already. But I see him in them. I see the lawlessness in the man of lawlessness, in the lawlessness of our age. And therefore I can use this middle section to interpret what's happening now. It's the beginning of that. For example, since 1971, there has been a major shift in the world weather. My brother is on the TV for weather forecasts, and he has shown me that from 1971 onwards, the weather worldwide is far less predictable than it was before, far more extreme. There are greater floods and greater droughts now than there were 30 years ago, you see? And there are more earthquakes now. The earthquakes are doubling every 10 years and happening in places that never had them before. Now, all that I see as a foreshadowing of where the Revelation talks about gigantic hailstones. When I was speaking in Cornwall over Easter in a sports center with a metal roof, and we had hail 3 times a day on a metal roof, and there was a ventilator right above me on the platform, and the video will show you hail on my head while I preached. So at the end I gave out the song, All Hail Redeemer Hail, and they sang it with great meaning and gusto. But you see, it was extraordinary weather over Easter, hailstorm after hailstorm. Book of Revelation talks about hailstones 100 weight each. It talks about the whole ocean and all the rivers being so polluted that people can't drink from them. But I see the beginnings of that. And I see so many things around me that remind me of the book of Revelation. Only it's far worse there. Do you see what I'm saying? So that when I interpret the middle chapters, I don't bother with the preterist. The historicist doesn't convince me, though some people are very convinced. But I certainly use the futurist, and I use the idealist. I say these are future events, but I can see them beginning to happen already. With me? So those are the two that I use for the middle part. Those are the two that I use for the first part. When I get to the last bit, I've really only got one. The new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem. I cannot believe they came in the 1st century AD. I can't believe we're in it now. I just can't, except in spirit. We're citizenship in the heavenly Zion, but I can't see the new Jerusalem on earth yet. I certainly believe it's coming. I'm not sure that I can see foretastes of it, because it's going to be a brand new earth and a completely new city built out in space and coming down out of heaven. So it seems to me the futurist is the only interpretation that you can apply to that last section. So when we go through the sections of Revelation, I find I have to shift from one key to another to unlock it. Have you followed me in this? And that seems to me the approach that we should take. It's when you pick up a book that says it's all this, and they would have ticks right along there, nothing here, or it's all this, or it's all this, or it's all this. I feel that that's when you get into an artificial situation where you force your interpretations to fit your system. And almost every book on Revelation I've studied does just that. It's forcing the book into a particular line of interpretation. And it just doesn't work. And I'm always very wary of people forcing the Bible to say what they want it to say. And I want to remind you finally that the overall purpose of the book is practical. And if you're not careful with these different schools of interpretation, you get away from the practical and into what I call the speculative. Do you know what I mean by that? And some people are just wanting to know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Whereas really the book is written not to tell you what's going to happen or when, but to get you ready for what's going to happen so that the crisis will not catch you out and you won't be surprised by it. Now that's a very, very important point. Because when we get next week into that middle section, chapters 4 onwards, one of the things that hits you straight away is that it's terribly difficult to put the predictions in order. Because sometimes the revelation does jump backwards, and there's a kind of flashback, a recapitulation, and sometimes it jumps right forwards to the end. And though there are some sequences, like the seals and the trumpets and the bowls, there are bits in between that you wonder where they fit in. In other words, if Jesus was giving us a timetable, a schedule, an order of events, so that we would know exactly where we were when they happen, then frankly he hasn't done a very good job. It's messed up. Because he should have given it to us in the exact order. Because it's written for simple people like us. And when you try and fit all the events into an order, into a timetable, and write them out so that this will be first, and that'll be second, and that'll be third, you find it almost impossible to do that. So why has Jesus made it so difficult for us to fit these things together? Well, the answer is he doesn't want you to know the order. He wants you to know what is going to happen rather than when it's going to happen. You with me? Because his interest is not in satisfying your curiosity so that you can say, we're living in the middle of chapter 16. That's not his interest. His interest is to help us to be so prepared for the worst that when it happens, we will remain faithful to Jesus. So, for example, I keep getting asked questions about who are the two witnesses in chapter 12, or is it chapter 11? Chapter 11. Who are the two witnesses that get killed in Jerusalem? I don't know who they are. I have no idea. When it happens, I'll know and I'll tell you. The point is, it's to help me to be ready. So that when it does happen, I say, oh, well, he told us this would happen. and it's going to be all right. It means that when the worst happens, you see, we can lift up our heads and say, hey, it's getting near. It's all happening according to Jesus' plan. That's the beauty of it. Which means that nothing's going to happen that he isn't ready for, and nothing need to happen that we're not ready for. Now that's the purpose of the book. And you make a big mistake if you think of it's a kind of old Moore's almanac so that you can predict the future, so that you can be in the secret knowledge of the future. You know, it's nice being in the know, isn't it? And saying, I know what's going to happen and you don't. It's not for that at all. It's so that we can be ready for it when it does happen, and not be predicting or forecasting when it will happen, but saying what will happen. And I just love preaching the book of Revelation, but I don't try and do it in such a way that it just satisfies people's curiosity about the future, but in such a way that they know what's coming, not when, but what's coming, and they know who's coming. That's the important thing. Now let me just, I've got a little more time and then we'll have questions. Let me just begin on the next section, chapters 4 to 19, which I gave the title to, Things Will Get Much Worse Before They Get Better. And yet the first part of this section is a surprise. Instead of getting straight into telling us what's going to happen, the revelation shows us God on his throne in heaven. And as you read chapter 4, an incredible sense of peace comes to you. If you've read it already, you'll know what I mean. You see the most beautiful, peaceful picture. And you see God sitting down on a throne without moving, just sitting there. And you see in front of him a glassy sea, the most calm sea. You know, just like a mirror. It stretches from horizon to horizon. And above the throne you see this beautiful rainbow. And the colors of it are breathtaking. And you just see God sitting on his throne in this complete peace. And before ever you're told about all the troubles down on earth, you're told God is on the throne. And that's so that you won't be so disturbed by what comes later. Do you follow me? That you get this tremendous sense, God isn't worried about the future. God isn't disturbed. God isn't struggling with Satan. We are, but he's not. It's terribly important to know that Satan can't do a thing without getting God's permission first. Do you realize that? He cannot touch you unless God says he can do so. You read the first chapter of Job. Now that's a wonderful sense. Nothing has got out of God's control. God hasn't lost control of history. We may think he has because all we see is what's happening on earth. And we think, hey, God's lost control of the situation. He hasn't at all. He's sitting calmly on his throne because it's all working out his way. And history is in his hands. There was a little girl running home from Sunday school, I think I told you about this last time, singing, God is still on the phone, God is still on the phone. Got a little wrong. The chorus is, God is still on the throne. And you see, the picture we're given in chapter 4 is before you see all the disturbing events, all the crises, the tragedies, the disasters that are going to come before the end of history, you see, God is just sitting on his throne. It's all right. Everything's under control. It's going my way. I know how I'm going to finish it. And you get this tremendous sense of worship. Now, the book of Revelation is full of worship. It's full of music. It's full of the most wonderful sights for your eyes and sounds for your ears. Many, many hymns are based on the book of Revelation. And of course, Handel's Messiah. Lots of it comes out of the book of Revelation, including the Hallelujah chorus. And it's full of praise to God, the God who made it all, who's running it all. That God is still in total control of everything. That is why he has made a promise to every Christian: you will never be tempted more than you can bear. There is no situation in which a Christian has to give in. God has promised never to allow you to be tempted more than you can say no to. Now, I meet many Christians coming to me and asking me to deliver them, asking for the ministry of deliverance from something they can't say no to. But God has promised that they will never be in that situation. God is in total control of Satan. And he will not let Satan tempt you too much. He doesn't say he won't let you be tempted. Otherwise, you'd never grow up if God made it easy for you. You will be tempted, but he will never let you be tempted too much. He has a piece of rope round Satan, and he only lets him go so far. That's a lovely promise. And we're shown this picture of God surrounded by the creatures he's made, surrounded by the angels. They're all singing away. They're singing hallelujah. They're singing glory to God. Before ever the book of Revelation tells you about any of the troubles that are coming on earth, it says you must get your eyes fixed on God and realize that he is at peace. He is the God of peace. He's not disturbed. He's not worried. And he's not surprised by anything that's going to happen. He knows it all. Now, you see, that's our security, isn't it? To know that God's not worried is a big help to me. Because when you're in a situation where you're afraid, isn't it great to be with someone who's not afraid? You see? When you're disturbed and upset, isn't it great to have someone alongside you who isn't disturbed and upset? And somehow they communicate their peace to you. That's how it is. Chapter 4 is fundamental to the book. Isn't it kind of Jesus to let us see that before he shows us what's going to happen? Then in chapter 5, John realizes that God has written down the end of history on a scroll, and that he's written down everything that will happen before the end of the world, and then rolled it up and sealed it with 7 seals. And that he can't bring history to a conclusion until he finds someone worthy to break the seals. God has decided that he himself will not bring history to an end. He wants a man to do that. He wants history to be in a man's hands. He wants a man to end history, a man to break the seals, or as we would put it, a man to press the button for the countdown of history. Now you see, I meet many people who are afraid that man will press the wrong button. North Koreans have the atom bomb now, you know. Who's going to press the button and cause the Holocaust that brings the world to an end? I'm not worried about that, because no man can get his finger on that button. And John begins to weep because God can't find a man good enough to press the button to bring history to an end. And he weeps, says, does that mean that evil is going to go on forever? Does that mean that this world, with all its suffering, with all its sin and with all its vice and crime, can't be brought to an end? And he weeps over that. And frankly, if you knew that this world is going to go on forever in the state it is now, wouldn't you weep? To think it's going to go on like this forever. No, it's got to come to an end. Someday, evil must be dealt with. Someday it's got to be wound up, and only the good things survive. It's got to happen. But John wept because nobody was found worthy. And then suddenly, he sees somebody standing by the throne who is like 2 animals. Now here I want to correct a very wrong impression. He sees somebody who's like a lion That's a good impression. The king of the jungle, a lion of the tribe of Judah. But it also says that he looks like a what? A lamb. Now, I think that's the word that really misleads us. The word should be ram, not lamb. Unfortunately, when people read the phrase Lamb of God, they think of a little cuddly white thing a few weeks old, can't hurt a fly. Do you know the kind of thing? You see that in stained glass windows in churches and in children's Bibles, picture books. Listen, the lamb always had to be 1 year old. And by that time, a sheep is fully grown. And a male lamb of 1 year has horns. And you would not like to be shut up in this room with a 1-year-old ram. Or I was just reading this morning in Exodus, and it said the Passover lamb could be either a sheep or a goat. Did you know that? It could have used a male goat for the Passover. And would you like to be locked in this room with a male goat, 1-year-old? Would you feel you wanted to go and cuddle it? Or would you keep at the far end of the room? And here we're told that this lamb has 7 horns. Now, Jacob's sheep have 6. Have you seen sheep with 6 horns? 3 either side, but this has 1 in the middle as well. Now, if you saw a 1-year-old ram with 7 horns, I don't think you'd want to go and play with it. It's a very strong picture. And so whenever I get to the word lamb in my Bible, I cross it out and put ram. Because it's a very false picture to picture the Jesus of Revelation as a little cuddly woolen thing, you know? It's a totally wrong picture. He's a full-grown ram. And when you put together a ram with 7 horns and a lion, you've got a pretty strong animal. And yet, John sees this animal and he sees that it has been slain, that it has been dead. It still bears the marks of someone killed. And then comes the voice, he is worthy to break the seals on the program of the final age of history. And that's when the action begins to happen. With the breaking of those first seals, the action takes place. But you see, before the action of the end of history happens, you've got this very static picture of God unmoving on a throne around a glassy sea. You've got this picture of stability. You've got this picture of unchangingness. And it's from that throne that there comes the scroll of the fearsome events which wind up history and bring evil to an end. But you see, the picture of Jesus breaking the scroll, the seals, and releasing the disasters would be quite wrong if it immediately followed the letters to the 7 churches. You see this against the background of a God who's totally at peace, in total control, is not going to be caught out or surprised by anything. And now says, now you can start it. This is the end of history. I'll just mention the first 4 seals and then we must finish for today. The first 4 seals are 4 horses. And straight away we're into symbolism. And the key to those 4 horses is their color. And the color of the first horse is white. The color of the second horse is red. The color of the third horse is black. And the color of the fourth horse is pale green. And these 4 horses ride out into the world. And they're often referred to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Have you heard that phrase? Well, in every series of 7, we find that the first 4 of the 7 go together. That's just a clue to help you with the later series of sevens. And the first 4 seals belong together. They are the 4 horses, different colors. What do they mean? Well, from the rest of the Bible, we know exactly what they mean, and indeed they're explained here. The white horse is always the horse used by a military aggressor. It is the horse of a conqueror. Jesus himself comes on a white horse at the end of the book. But here it is a symbol of military aggression, of imperialism, of somebody wanting to expand his empire or territory, riding out to conquer others. Inevitably, anyone who does that leads to the red horse, which is bloodshed. And when people are trying to take territory from others, they invariably cause bloodshed. The black horse is the color of famine. As human flesh goes black when there's famine. And it talks about the shortage of food and a huge amount of money needed to buy a little bit of food. If you read on, it's the horse of famine. And when there is a shortage of food, invariably the 4th horse follows. Pale green is the color of disease, of plague, of sickness. Now then, those 4 horses are very clear, aren't they? Military aggression leads to bloodshed, leads to shortage of food, leads to disease. Pestilence. I can see the 4 horses in Bosnia today. I can see them in Rwanda. I can see them in Angola. But those 4 horsemen will one day ride through the whole earth. See? They've been riding so many times already. I can see the foreshadowing. But here they ride out into the whole world. And you see shortly afterwards that something like 1/4 of the world's population perish. Well, that has never happened yet, has it? Just not happened on that scale. But in certain countries it's happening on that scale. So we can see it coming. And that's the beginning of the disasters that are unfolded in the middle of the book of Revelation. But they make so much sense to me. Yes, I know it's in symbolism, I know it's in a picture. But they stand for those simple 4 things: aggression, bloodshed, famine, disease. It's an inevitable progress. And it's happening now locally, but will one day happen on a world scale. Yes, it's frightening, but don't forget, God is still on the throne. And God is still reigning over the whole scene. He is allowing it to happen, yes, because these things must happen. And Jesus said, I've told you beforehand so that your heart will not be troubled. I just thank Jesus that he's been so honest with us. He said, if it were not so, I would tell you. And he's told us the worst so that we may be ready for it. Well, we've got into the beginning of chapter 6. And next time, in the first half of the afternoon, we'll look at chapter 6 through to about chapter 16 and really get to grips with that. That's when you get out of your depth usually. But we'll really get to grips with it and we'll study it carefully. And then in the second half, I want to look at one very important question, and it's this. There is a teaching that is very widespread in the church today. It began about 1830, but it's now almost universal. And that is that the church will be taken out of the world before all these bad troubles come. I'm sure you must have heard of this. It's sometimes known as the secret rapture of the church, and I want to look very carefully at that because it's the most important question when we read that middle bit of Revelation, when the trouble is at its worst. Are we going to be in that or not? That's a very important question, and it's one on which Christians differ, but one on which we need to be sure of what we believe. And I'll tell you what my position is then. All right, good. That's enough then for today.
You have been listening to David Pawson. Other talks by David Pawson can be found and downloaded free of charge by visiting www.davidpawson.co.uk.